recording from this point forward. What in God's name, right, is perspective? All right. Perspective is the optical illusion that lines that we know to be running parallel to each other, right, actually converge at a certain point and turn a two-dimensional surface like my tablet into something that appears like a three-dimensional surface. The reason that this phenomenon physically occurs is because of the curvature of the Earth. Right? So when you look towards the curvature of the Earth, right, at a certain point, your eye level intersects, right, the curvature of the Earth. Right? That point, depending on the height of the viewer or the surface that that person is standing on, happens at around 4.8 kilometers away. For those of you who haven't leaped into the 21st century and embraced the metric system, I'm sorry, I have no idea what that is in miles. I think it's 1.8 kilometers to mile. I'm pretty sure that that's the way that that works out. Anyway, it's a ways away. So because of this optical illusion, railroad tracks being the classic example of this that we know to be running parallel to each other, converge at a particular point, right, on what is called your horizon line. I'm going to introduce a whole bunch of different vernacular, right, this class that we're going to be using for the remainder of the course. So if it feels like there's an avalanche of information that you're inundated with, don't worry, it's not going to be the last time that I mention this stuff. I'm going to be using this stuff over and over and over again. And my goal in the terms of using this stuff over and over and over again is to become so painfully repetitive, right, that this stuff becomes embedded in your brain so that you don't have to think about this stuff anymore. It just becomes second nature, right, because you're so familiar with it. Now, when we have, right, the optical illusion of perspective, you have basically two different kinds of perspective. One would what we might call illusory perspective. The other one is what we might call imaginary perspective. What I mean by illusory perspective is that if you stood in front of a picture in front of this, what is called a vanishing point, that two-dimensional surface would appear to become a three-dimensional extension of your own reality. Basically, perspective as a system works so well and has been around so long is because it accurately reflects the way our visual system physically works. Right? So when we occupy this very special spot in front of this very special place, right, that two-dimensional image becomes an illusionistic representation of our three-dimensional space. Basically, the illusion is flawless. The problem with this type of perspective is that as soon as you step away from that position, right, the illusion breaks, and it's obvious that it's a two-dimensional object. It's a two-dimensional surface that appears to be three-dimensional. Now, what imaginary perspective is, and this is the majority of pictures that you've ever been exposed to throughout your life, is that we have the imaginative capacity to to imagine as though we were standing in front of that spot, right, and then imagine what it would feel like if we took on that spot. This is why pictures in film, television, YouTube clips, paintings, drawings, right, for the last 6 centuries have been as effective as they are in terms of perspective, is because we are physically placing ourselves as an audience into that imaginary spot, as if we occupied that perfect place in a theater all the time. And as a result, we have certain psychological and emotional consequences that we basically take on that allow us to interpret pictures in the way that people that make pictures want us to. Right? And if you don't think that there is a fair amount of information or a fair amount of, what's a nice way of calling it, manipulation that goes into picture making, by the end of this 14 weeks, you will be painfully aware, at least how perspective plays into the manipulation of your perception and your emotions because of our ability to do this. So, like I said, we're going to introduce some vernacular. First step in any perspective drawing, okay, is to draw a horizon line. Right? So if you're drawing in landscape or taking notes in landscape, or if you're taking notes in portrait, doesn't matter, draw a line at about the halfway point of your piece of paper. That line is the first step in any perspective drawing, your horizon line. Now, your horizon line is importantly synonymous with a couple of different things for us. It is, first off, and most importantly, synonymous with your eye level. When I say that it is synonymous with your eye level, what I mean is that it's synonymous with your audience's eye level. And by audience, I mean anybody that you show your picture to. So you are anticipating that your audience, right, some viewer, some hypothetical viewer is going to be looking at the thing that you're drawing. By extension, this means that it's also synonymous with your camera level. And by extension, this is also synonymous with something called point of view. I'm going to be referring to HL or horizon line as HL for short, and point of view as POV for short. Point of view has a slightly wider designation than the narrow one that we're using it in here. Right? We'll go over that at another point, but for right now, this is good enough for us. For our purposes in this course, you can only have one horizon line, which means you only have one eye level, which means you only have one consistent reality for your audience. There are lots of different examples that I could raise, right, for conflicting realities using perspective. Doctor Strange's Adventures in the Big Shitty World of Multi-Madness, or whatever the fuck that thing was that just came out, would be a good example of that. Inception would be a good example of that. Basically, anything where reality breaks down or there are conflicting realities is a good example of that. The earliest one of these would probably be surrealism, right, so to speak. So, or mid-20th or early to mid-20th century painting. Our job in this course, right, is to create one consistent reality in varying degrees. Okay, so we're not going to be manipulating multiple horizon lines inside your picture. Second step in any perspective drawing is to establish your vanishing points. To begin with, and by to begin with, I mean for the first like 6 or 7 weeks, all we're going to be doing is variations of 1 point and 2 point perspective. So you have two different types of vanishing points. At the end of your line, you have two little marks. Those are your 2 point vanishing points. At the halfway mark, you have another mark. That is your 1 point vanishing point. Those points will always be that distance away from each other. They will always be equidistant away from each other. It doesn't matter if the line is this long, or this long. The 2 points will always be at the end of that line. Your 1 point will always be in the middle of those 2 points, always and forever and ever. Why will they always be that way? Because we made this system up. That's the way this system works, right? For no other reason than that. Okay, so that's the first step in any of your perspective drawings. Now, what this 1 point also indicates is that if you drew a line straight up, why? If you drew a line straight up and straight down, the same distance away from the 1 point vertically as the 2 points are away from the 1 point, what you essentially have is a cross that has 4 equal quadrants to each other. At the end of that vertical line, at both the top and the bottom, you have what are called station points. Station points are important, right, for us to know, right, but not so important that we need to spend any time on them right now. All that we need to know is that they exist and they're equidistant away from the 1 point, as is the 2 points away from, as are the 2 points away from the 1 point. Your station point, or this vertical line, also represent what is known as the center of vision. So basically that indicates, right, what is to the left and what is to the right of your hypothetical audience's center of vision. So what you have is a horizon line that tells your audience what is above and below their eye level. You have a center of vision that tells your audience what's to the left and to the right of their center of vision. So what this means is that if I related this horizon line to your hypothetical audience's face, this is where their eyes would be, which means that the 1 point vanishing point is directly in between the eyes of your hypothetical audience. Okay, so this has consequences. let's say that you've got a picture, right? Not unlike the picture that you're looking at me in now. By the way, for those of you who are concerned about, right, getting digital format, right, or an online course, right, when it's perfectly capable, right, of doing this class in person, this is one of those classes that works just as well, if not better, right, online, right, than it does in person, simply because we've got all of these different recording, right, and right resource, right, capacities, but also I can physically start to use the frame that I'm in, presenting myself to you in, as a way of showing the points that I'm trying to identify or trying to illuminate. So let's say that you're looking at a frame, right? And you now choose to put your horizon line in the middle of the frame. What you've now done is located your audience vertically inside the frame. Where you put your audience vertically inside the frame has emotional and psychological consequences on how your audience is going to interpret that picture. Let's say that I put my 1 point vanishing point directly inside in the center of the frame. You've now positioned your audience directly in the center of the frame. Now, this is either, maybe this could be a good decision, this could be a bad decision. Doesn't really make any difference right now. What does make a difference is that it's very different than putting your horizon line here and your 1 point vanishing point there, or putting your horizon line here and putting your 1 point vanishing point there. All three of those decisions might be showing you audience the exact same information, but the information is going to be interpreted perceptually, psychologically, and emotionally entirely differently. So basically what it is that I'm trying to say here, right, is that even before you started to draw anything, film anything, photograph anything, you've made a decision that is basically going to determine to a large extent how your audience interprets what it is that you show them. This is what I would call and will be referring to as a structural decision. When I use the term structural, try to think about it. And it's always good to use like unfamiliar terms, right? Or abstract terms. Try to personify those terms, right? So that it makes sense to you on a deeply personal level. So basically try to make sense of it in relationship to your own person, your own body. By a structural decision, I mean that it's very different. It would be very difficult for me to change my skeletal structure. I can't just decide to make myself taller, right? Or shorter. I can change my shirt. That's easy. Right? That would be a surface decision, right? So we've got two different kinds of decisions that we're making when creating pictures. We're creating structural decisions, very difficult to change them. Surface decisions, equally important, very easy to change, right? But dependent upon the structure that's underneath them, right? I belabor this particular point because perspective is one of those things that if you fuck it up at the beginning, the rest of everything else is ruined. Right. So you guys are probably more familiar with film and television than you are with anything else. Imagine that you've gone through the mind-bogglingly expensive process of putting a camera someplace, right? Blocking in actors, right? Setting up lighting, paying for crafts and services, getting yelled at by people who are a higher pay grade than you are, right? All of this shit, right, takes time and money. Now let's just say like it's time to roll camera. You decide that rather than wanting the camera up here, you want it down there. You can basically say goodbye to all the work that you did for this, right? Because it's completely useless. That's what perspective is. Making this decision versus this decision and knowing why you want to make those decisions. Okay. And within the next 3 to 4 weeks, you're going to have a very clear idea as to why that is the case. Okay, to continue the introduction of all of this all this initial information. Connect all 4 points of the corner or all 4 points of this cross with a diagonal line. Now, imagine that everything inside that diagonal or inside that diamond, if you were to draw something inside of it, it's going to look okay. Right? And by look okay, I mean it's not going to look weird. If you draw out in these areas, it might look okay, right? But there's an increasing chance that it might start to look weird. Why is this the case? Because this is a system that we created. This system, like all other systems that we've created, has limitations. Okay? This is where the system starts to break down. It doesn't break down for everything, but it does start to break down for some stuff. It's important to know the limitations of this system, right? Because as you go through this, right, and start bumping up against things that don't quite work or don't quite make sense, there's going to be an intuitive response on your part to say, well, what have I done wrong? I fucked the drawing up. It's like, you might not have done anything wrong. It might be the drawing that's fucking the drawing up, right? Because the system physically doesn't work the same way past a certain point. Okay, so this is something just to be aware of, right, for right now. It's also something that can be utilized, right, to good purpose, right, for, reasons that we'll go over in the not too distant future. Okay, I am going to screenshot this because this is the end of my hopelessly irresponsible introduction to perspective, right? But it does give you, right, some vernacular that we all need to know, right, in order to move forward. Now, because I'm aware that I write like a 3-year-old, at least in this medium, I actually have lovely handwriting. I just can't take the time to do it. Do you guys have any questions in terms of what is on the screen, right? What it is that I've said? Questions that might relate in some way. I like questions. Every once in a while, I get one that surprises me and I got to think a little bit about it, right? So by all means, please chuck them forward. Yeah, you don't have to wait. You can just ask.
The question that I had was just, sorry, there's an echo.
Marie, can you kill your microphone? Because if you have multiple microphones going on at the same time inside the same space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because this would be for my headphones.
Okay. This is a good question. So I don't know if any of you have ever seen the question is like, what's a good example of illusory perspective versus imaginary perspective? Marie, I'm going to start a new screen share here. Okay, I've started a new screen share there, Marie. If everybody can go to my new screen share, those of you who are independent as well as in the classroom, just let me know when you guys have got it. It's just a blank Google page right now. We're good? Okay, fantastic. Okay, here's a classic one. Well, we'll start off even more classic. Oh, what is this garbage? Ugh, how bad a lot of this shit is. There's a good one. Okay, so the idea would be here is that if you occupied this space, what did I just do? I don't want to do that. If you stood right in front of this point right here, your eye level right there, this barrel vault would look like it's an extension of your space, right? There would be no distinguishing between it, right, or anything else. Same thing with whatever this is supposed to be, right? If you stood right in front of that point, this two-dimensional image becomes, right, a space, right, that appears like it's an extension of your three-dimensional space. If I go over to something like this doesn't share the same, or this doesn't share the same sort of perspective. This becomes imaginary, right? Where we think about this thing as occupying a illusory perspective space, but, right, doesn't have the same sort of effect as this does. So an even better one, I don't know how to Google this. This one. This is the first ever, I think, live film. You guys are probably familiar with it. where people were literally fucking terrified, right, of this. Where they thought the train, right, was going to come through the screen, right, and run them over. Because we have this imaginary capacity, right, in order to see, or in order to put ourselves in the position of what that would look like. I think there's an even better one where it's coming straight at you. YouTube, the lesser known cousin of YouTube. Now, where's the one where it comes right at you? No. This is so much better than I thought it would be. Anyway, I don't want to waste time, right, doing that. Now, let's just pick. We're gonna watch a clip of this, right? Anyway, right, at some point, so we may as well just. Okay. This would be a good example of illusory perspective, right? In the sense that we can imagine ourselves in front of a vanishing point, right? That is directly here, right? That makes us look like an extension of our space. This is very different than, say, why can I not find? Than say this, right? Where it looks like we're looking at something in perspective, right? But it's not an extension of our physical point of view. Does that make sense? My pleasure. Jack, you had a question before we sidetracked into that. If it's easier, you can just type it in as well. Don't worry about Matthew. Don't worry about structural decisions. Structural decisions are a way of me introducing something that we're going to be talking about, right, in the future. It's something that's very difficult to change, right? Again, think about it as analogously to the skeleton of your body. You can't change it, or at least it's very difficult to change it. And also, if you're sending me a chat, please send it to the one that has my microphone active. That's the one that I'm looking at. Did you type in your question, Jack? Oh, you're good. You don't have a question anymore. Okay, cool. Anybody else? Because otherwise we're moving on. It's not the depth of space so much in that, or as opposed to the fact that because we see three-dimensionally and perspective creates the illusion of three dimensions or three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface, that's what makes it feel like we're looking at real space. That's what perspective does. It's literally a definition of perspective. And there's different kinds of perspective. It may as well, it's not a bad, it's a good opportunity for me to, right, introduce, right, this as well. Right, there are different kinds of perspective. Perspective is what's perspective in general, right, is a subset of what's called what the hell, graphical illusion, graphical something. It's the second word of it is escaping me right now. Graphical projection. everything in graphical projection is meant to take something that's 2D and turn it into something that's kind of 3D, right? But does so in entirely different ways. The type of perspective that we're doing is linear perspective. We're also going to do I don't want to rotate this. We're also going to do curvilinear perspective. Right, but there is something else, and we're going to spend a little bit of time doing this next class, but very, very little of it, called orthographic projection. Orthographic is just a fancy way of saying that if you're dealing with rectilinear objects, all of the vertical and horizontal lines, right, will be 90 degrees to each other. This is typically used in industrial design or object design, right, when you're kind of mapping out the fronts, the sides, the tops, the bottoms, right, of an object, right, for its projection into, right, a perspective-based system. There's also isomorphic perspective, and there's also axonometric perspective. There's also a couple of other subdivisions, right, of these as well. I think there's one even called Legionnaire's perspective. Basically, these things relate to, right, the angle of lines as they intersect with each other. I think axonometric, right, has lines that run 45 degrees to each other forever and ever, whereas isomorphic, I believe, is 33 degrees to each other. Basically, lines in isomorphic, right, would look like this with respect to each other, but there would be no recession. With an axonometric, and I might have these backwards, but you'll forgive me, right? These things run at 45-degree angles to each other. So we're going to do both of these things because they create a quote-unquote realistic representation of the world. We're going to do a little bit of this because of its relationship to these two things. We're not going to do either of these things, right, other than mention them and how they're confused with what's linear perspective. These two types of perspective are generally used in architectural rendering, right, or optical illusions, or in classical, right, and this is not meant, and this isn't meant to be an offensive term, right, in any shape or form, right, but what was up until recently called Oriental art, right, specifically referring to traditional Japanese / Chinese art, right, that had perspective associated with it, but was very different than the European variety. And when these two different systems came in contact with each other, the Japanese and the Chinese automatically recognized that the linear perspective of the Europeans was accurate in reflection of our visual systems, and they didn't give a fuck because it was just a different way of visualizing things, right? And became a stylistic choice, a cultural choice, right? As opposed to something that needed to be done. Okay, so that's maybe a bit of more of an answer than you wanted, but that's my job. Does that clear things up for you? Ewan? Would that be how you pronounce your name, Ewan? Let's take silence as a yes. Any other questions? A little bit. Good. Short answer is yes and no. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, before we break, let's go over a couple of other things so that we can get our toes wet in the proverbial waters of perspective. Okay, like I mentioned, first step in doing any perspective drawing, right, is to draw your horizon line and place your vanishing points. Also, like I mentioned, we're going to be doing nothing but 1 point and 2 point for the next number of weeks. 1 point has an alternative description. It is alternatively known as parallel perspective. 2-point is alternatively known as oblique perspective. The vanishing points that we're dealing with here indicate a 45-degree angle to an object. What do I mean by parallel and oblique perspective? Let's say that I take this fancy visual aid, my sunglass case, right, and I hold it up like this with respect to the camera. Top and bottom of that object, right, are parallel to the top and bottom of the frame. Parallel to my face, because I'm also parallel to the camera, parallel to you guys, presuming that you are facing the camera in a parallel manner. Right? That's what parallel perspective is. This is what a 1-point object is that the front of that object is always, the top and bottom of it are always parallel to the frame, parallel to the audience's viewing plane. Oblique perspective, right, is anything other than parallel. So I can have parallel like this, I can have parallel like that. And then I've got a potentially infinite array of oblique perspectives in between those two parallel points. The 2 points, right, at either end of that vanishing point imply a 45-degree angle. Right? Again, because this is a system that we made up and that's the way that it works. Obviously, there are angles in between 45 degrees and parallel. We're going to go over those in a couple of classes. You don't need to worry about them for right now. Okay, so if I say parallel perspective, what I'm referring to is 1 point. If I say 2 point, I'm also referring to oblique perspective. These things exist inside the same space, right? So this parallel object, that parallel object, nothing's happened with the space. There's nothing distinct between those things about the space they inhabit, right? They inhabit the same space quite easily. Right, now, in addition to, right, having, right, rules to set up the drawing, right, there are also rules to start doing any perspective, or to start drawing any perspective object. I will be the first amongst you to admit that the first class and a half of this is not the most exciting classes that you will ever experience. People don't like taking them. I don't like teaching them, but you need to do them, right? Because if you don't get this stuff under your belt, nothing else gets off the ground. So if this is confusing, right, even though it seems relatively simple, if it's confusing when you start doing it, put the time in with this first assignment and the second assignment. I could not recommend you putting more time in than you think is necessary to these first 2 assignments, because it will make the rest of this course way less painful for you. What you guys need, right, in order to do anything in this class, right, is to do some basic version of object design. In a 2-dimensional sense, all objects can be broken down to these 3 shapes: square, circle, triangle. When we start to get into the dimensional world, we start to get into cubes, pyramids, peaked roofs, cones, cylinders, spheres. Everything that we design, everything that you guys are going to draw is going to be based on these objects. All we're doing today is this stuff. And the granddaddy of all those things is that guy right there. Can you draw some sort of rectilinear object in 1 point and 2 point? Reason being is that cube, right, has a very specific relationship to a triangle, right, and to a circle, right, or a pyramid and a peaked roof, right? So the analogy holds true dimensionally as well as graphically. If I refer to something graphic, I'm referring to 2 dimensions. If I refer to dimensional, I'm referring to 3 dimensions. So, nice thing about perspective, again, it's got rules. Follow those rules. There will be a step-by-step right in your handout about those rules. If you're confused, don't worry about being confused. Just follow the rules, follow the steps. You will get perspective objects by default. Right? I basically bullshitted my way through first-year university calculus this way. I'm terrible at proving formula, really good at memorizing stuff. Insert meaningless information. Get meaningless answer. Expose holes in the educational system, but get the fuck out of Dodge with a good mark, right? Because you followed the steps. This might be your calculus. So let's just say that we're drawing a cube. First step of that cube is to draw the front of that cube. You can draw this thing any way that you want. This is just a convenient way for me to draw it or explain it. Characteristics of that cube. The top and the bottom of that cube are going to be parallel to the horizon line. Okay, so this line and that line will be parallel to that line. That is literally definitive of one point. Your vertical lines will be 90 degrees to the horizon line, always and forever and ever. Right, so if I drag that line up, that's running at 90 degrees to the horizon line, perpendicular. Second step, you will only have one vanishing point. That one vanishing point will only and always be this one. You will never use a 2-point vanishing point for a 1-point object. Underline that, put stars behind it, right? Exclamation marks, expletives, happy faces, write it in red, circle it, do whatever it is you need to do in order to underline the importance of that point. This is the easiest way to fuck up a perspective drawing, right? And mix it is by mixing 1-point and 2-point vanishing points. What that means is that you are going to connect all 4 corners with straight lines to your central vanishing point. Last step. Is the back face of that object mirrors the front face. What that means is that these lines that are receding towards that central vanishing point are the recessive lines of my 1-point object. Wherever it is I want my cube to end, and I'm just going to guess, that back line runs parallel to the front line until it intersects the 2 recessive lines on that side. Where it intersects those 2 recessive lines tells me where to draw the top and the bottom line until they intersect the recessive lines on the other side. And now over here, right, I get 2 lines or 2 intersecting points that stack up on top of each other to now identify where my other vertical line for the other side is. This gives you your transparent cube. Okay. This is also right where people start to have serious problems interpreting these pictures, right? Because you have all these lines that you have to make sense of. Line weight at this point makes a difference. These are what I would call structural lines. So another way that I'll be using the term structural. Structural are the light lines that tell you how this thing is made, as if you had inside or X-ray vision, that you can see this thing from the inside out. Finish lines are going to be darker. So if I want to make it feel like this box is fully opaque, I don't necessarily have to erase those lines. What I do is darken the lines that I want people to interpret as being visible. For purposes of your assignment, I want to see your structural lines with a lighter pencil mark or a lighter line. Right? For your finish lines, I want them to be slightly darker. So that if I decided to open up that box, so to speak, from the front, because I understand the structure of that thing, I can darken those lines, right, to make it feel like it's open from the front of that object. Now, the nice thing about perspective, because of rules, is that it allows you to draw imaginarily. This object, an object that is below the horizon line, is going to be easy. That's what the universal check mark looks or stands for. What I mean by easy is that it's going to make sense to your brain. Most of the shit that we interact with on a day-to-day basis is below our eye level. The desk that you're sitting at, the computer that you look at, the car that you get into, the chair that you sit down on, the table you eat off of, we're always looking down on stuff. What that means is that it's very familiar to your brain. Because it's familiar to your brain's very comfortable interpreting that. Comfortability breeds confidence, right? In terms of drawing something, right? Understanding something. That's very different if I tried to put that box floating in the sky. For those of you who are observational drawers, right? So what I mean by observational is that you're very good at looking at something and then copying that thing that you're looking at. If you look at something below you, that's relatively easy because you can put it on a table and do that. But if I take this object and I put it up here, right, I either have to stand there like an asshole, right, and hold that thing above my head, right, and draw it observationally, or I can draw it because I understand how that thing is drawn prospectively. So if I was to ask you to draw, which I'm going to, a cube that was floating above the horizon line, same process. Top and bottom parallel to the horizon line, vertical lines perpendicular to the horizon line. All four corners get attached to your central vanishing point. Back face mirrors the front face. And then you're going to darken the lines that you want to be your finish lines. So again, if I want that box to be fully opaque, that's what my box might look like. If I wanted to open that box up from the bottom, I could because I understand the structure, right, of that thing. If I wanted you to draw an object that was a little bit above the horizon line or a little bit below the horizon line, which I'm going to. Same process. Top and bottom parallel to the horizon line, vertical lines perpendicular to the horizon line. All four corners attached to the central vanishing point. Back face mirrors the front face. There's your transparent box. Darken the lines that you want to be visible as your final lines. Again, because you understand the structure of that thing, you can darken certain lines, right, and then make that thing feel like it's open from the front. This is what I am going to refer to, right, as an object below the horizon line, B for short, above the horizon line, A for short, and on the horizon line, O for short. So you have 3 1-point rectilinear objects that you have to draw for purposes of your assignment, AOB. That's what that refers to. Above, below, and on the horizon line. Now, does that make sense for everyone? There any questions as to how the gods have descended and revealed the mysteries of 1-point perspective to you? And if there are, please ask, because again, if it's fuzzy now, it ain't getting less fuzzy as we move forward. Okay, great. Probably of very little surprise to anybody, right? You are also going to have to do 3 2-point rectilinear objects, AOB, above, on, and below the horizon line. Now, as I mentioned with a 1-point, you can start drawing that object anywhere you want, right? It's just very easy for me to explain drawing that object by drawing the front face first. Same thing with a 2-point. You can start drawing a 2-point any way you want. The way that I'm going to suggest or explain it is by drawing the front corner of this thing first. That front corner, right, is going to have exactly one thing in common with a 2-point object or with a 1-point object. That front corner is going to be perpendicular to the horizon line. Right? All rectilinear objects in 1-point and 2-point are always, their vertical lines are always going to be 90 degrees to the horizon line. Okay, so for 2-point, your vertical lines are 90 degrees to the horizon line. Second point, and most important, you will only and always use your 2-point vanishing points for a 2-point object. You will never use a 1-point vanishing point. Again, underline it, mark it in red, right? Have a fucking cartoon face screaming at it, right? Whatever it is you need to do to make that important. Attach an audio file to it, make a GIF. I don't care. Right? As long as it penetrates. So What that means is that you're going to attach the top and the bottom of that line to this vanishing point and to the opposing vanishing point. Then you're going to guess about how wide you want that object to look. These things do not have to be cubes for purposes of your assignment. They just have to be rectilinear, box shaped. Now, if a 2-point object gets confusing, this is where it gets confusing. So if you've tuned out and you're wondering how they got the electrical system into your apartment or the school, right, this is the time to check back in. Consider this to be your right vanishing point. This is your left vanishing point. This is the left-hand side of your object. This is the right-hand side of your object. You're going to connect the top and bottom of the left-hand side of your object to the right vanishing point. You're going to connect the top and bottom of the right-hand side of your object to the left vanishing point. So this point here gets connected there. So does this point. They both go to the same spot. You'll excuse my squiggly line. And then same thing in the opposite direction. Okay. If I've drawn this correctly, what did I just do? I don't want that. Stop it. No, go away. Yes. If I've drawn this correctly, those two intersecting points should line up directly on top of each other to give you your transparent 2-point cube. And then just like with your 1-point cube, you're going to darken the lines that you want to read as finish lines. Again, for purposes of your assignment, I want to be able to see both of those things, structural lines and the finish lines. That is your 2-point object below the horizon line. Now, as I mentioned, 2-point generally gets fuzzy. Did that get fuzzy for anybody? And be honest, because it's important. Who's that? Aurora, are you in like a plastic box? Why does it look like your room is like a scene out of a horror movie? Like are you in a scene out of like American Psycho? Like is there like an axe wielding maniac around you, or what is happening there? Is that just raw insulation? Where are you? You in a construction site? Because if fucking Christian Bale's behind you talking about Huey Lewis in the news, you got some problems, dude. That's cool. I lived in an attic at one point, so I get it. I also lived in a room with a fridge, a hot plate, and a hole in the window that I had to put a pillow in at one point. So I feel you. All right. Any questions on the 2-point? Exactly. It doesn't serve no purpose. It still tells you like what's to the left and what's to the right, what there's going to be more of, but you don't use it for the construction of the perspective object. You're absolutely correct. You bet. Okay, so if I was to put that object above the horizon line, same characteristics. Vertical line perpendicular to the horizon line. Top and bottom get connected to both the left and the right vanishing point. Guesstimate how wide you want that thing to be. Top and bottom of the left-hand side go to the right-hand vanishing point. Top and bottom of the right-hand side go to the left-hand vanishing point. Those two bisecting points at the back should stack up directly on top of each other. There's your transparent cube. Darken the lines that you want to act as finish lines. Bob's your uncle. There's your transparent cube above the horizon line in 2-point. There's a design group in Vancouver here called BYU, Bob's Your Uncle Design, that I used to do some work with. I've always thought it's a stupid name. Same thing above and below the horizon line. Vertical line perpendicular to the horizon line. Is that a whole bag of Pringles that you just jammed in your face, Aurora? Top and bottom of that line get attached to the vanishing point on both sides. Guesstimate the width. Top and bottom of the left go to the right vanishing point. Top and bottom of the left go to the right, or the right go to the left vanishing point. Vertical lines stack up. Last vertical line stacks up above those bisecting lines at the back. There's your 2 point, a little bit above, a little bit below the horizon line. This one people find a little bit more difficult sometimes, right? Because you have lines both going up and down, right? As opposed to just up or down, right? In their recessional capacity. This is your 2 point above, your 2 point on, and your 2 point below, right? For this part, right, of your assignment. It is worth pointing out at this point for me, also shit that can go wrong. If I was to draw a 2 point way out here, I would go through the exact same process. In terms of establishing the perspective lines, right, for that object. This is what I mean by things starting to look weird. See how things start to get kind of like pulled out and pinched, distorted in that area? This is what I meant by the question mark beforehand. You're not going to have a problem with 1 points. 1 points will work just fine in this area. 2 points will start to get more and more weird until the point where you get to this vertical line. If you extend from either vanishing point on either side, as soon as you get past it, the drawing basically becomes impossible to do. The system breaks down. Okay, so if you experience this, just be aware that you're not doing anything wrong. It's a limitation to the system. Okay, that is about an hour and a half of you guys listening to me blather on. That's a long time to keep asses in seats for anything, let alone perspective stuff. So, unless you guys have some burning question, I think now is a good time to take a break. You guys go to the bathroom, get a coffee, do whatever it is you need to do. Okay, and then we will reset at 5 minutes to your time, and then we'll go over the rest of the stuff that we need to today. Okay? Cool. All right. We'll see you guys in 15 minutes. We've taken care of the rectilinear objects. Now what we need, right, we're going to knock these guys right off first, right? You're going to have four of these in 1 point, and you're going to have four of these guys in 2 point, just above and below the horizon line. No need to do them a little bit above, a little bit below, because it's the same thing as doing it below. First step, again, drawing your horizon line, right? And then your vanishing points. As I mentioned beforehand, right, you can draw a perspective object in any way, shape, or form that you want. So, right, with respect to right the rectilinear objects that we just drew, right, say that I was asking to draw right by drawing this front face right here first. Right, what I'm going to ask you to do now is, rather than that, I'm going to ask you to draw as if you're just drawing a flat shape on the ground. Right, so you're going to draw the bottom of the object first. So with respect to 1 point, what that means is that the front of the object would be parallel to the horizon line. And then both front corners would then be attached to your central vanishing point. And then you would basically just kind of guess, right, where the back of that object was going to be. Okay? It doesn't matter if it's square, right, rectilinear, or whatever, right? What we're looking for is the base of some sort of pyramid. Now, in order to find the center, right, of where the pyramid peak will eventually be, we're going to connect the corners of that object. Where those two lines cross over gives you the center, right, of that base, regardless of the shape that you've made. Now you're going to draw a vertical line straight up from that to an arbitrary height. But that vertical line will be perpendicular to the horizon line. Okay, so again, 90 degrees to the horizon line. Doesn't matter how tall it is, right? All that's going to change is the overall shape of the pyramid. It's not going to change it's not going to change it into anything other than a pyramid. Once you've established the peak or the height of that, you're going to connect all four corners to that peak in order to establish your pyramid. And then you're going to darken the lines that you want to be visible. Now, this is where things start to go weird for people, potentially, because I can do the exact same drawing. Go through the exact same steps. But now I start to darken different lines, right? So that drawing up until that point structurally is exactly the same. But if I start darkening different lines, shit gets real weird real fast. Okay, so the lines that you darken make a big difference. And unfortunately, it's like, how do you distinguish from one to the other? I got no good answer for you other than it just gets easier, right? Once you get more and more used to doing them. Okay, so don't do shit like this. It's actually kind of shocking, like how people have managed to like come up and draw certain things, right? They've drawn things fine, perfectly, structurally, but then darken lines in ways that make the object look so fucked up that I can't even recognize it, and it takes a while for me to unpack it. So you're in good company, right? If it happens to you, right? Don't be surprised. It's just one of those things that you kind of have to get used to seeing. And so I think it's just as important to point out what can go wrong as it is in terms of like how to do things, right, as well, so that you're not mystified by them when they happen. Same thing if you're drawing above the horizon line, which you're going to have to. Front and back, parallel to the horizon line. Recessional lines going to your central vanishing point. Connect the corners to establish the center of the base, but now you're looking up at the bottom of the base. Now, when you're looking up at objects, things have a way of going a little bit more sideways more easily than when you're looking down on things, right? Just because of the acuity of the angle. So if I bring this vertical line up for the center to this point and call that the center of my pyramid, this is what my pyramid is going to look like. And you can see some obvious problems with that already. Is that this line and this line are exactly the same line, right? Which means that that object is going to look weird, potentially. As a way of getting around that, draw this vertical line taller, so you can then at least expose another side of the object. Same sort of problem in terms of identifying which lines maybe you should be darkening. But once you get used to it, a bit easier. Right? So how you darken the lines, right, is going to make a big difference in terms of how easy it is to identify your object as being correct. This is also why I want to see your structural lines in your assignment. It makes it easier for me, if it doesn't make it easier for me to identify what's gone wrong, it certainly makes it easier for me to point out to you, right, where things have gone wrong when we do feedback sections, right, of subsequent classes. Okay, so this is your 1 point pyramid above, this is your 1 point pyramid below. Any questions on how we did that? Okay, 2-point. You're going to do the exact same thing, right? Except now you're going to use your 2-point vanishing points. Okay, so I'm going to draw the base of the object on the ground using only my 2 points. And then again, the exact same thing. Connect the corners to establish the central section of that object, and then drag a line up vertically to whatever height you want. And I'm dragging it up above the horizon line this point, or this time, in order to make a point that doesn't make a difference. And that's why you don't have to do it. And then connect that peak to all 4 corners. And then darken the lines that you want to be your finish lines. Exact same thing above the horizon line. Okay, 2 vanishing points to establish the base. Connect the corners. Vertical line up to an arbitrary height. Same word of warning in terms about things looking weird above the horizon line. Darken the lines that you want to be visible as your finish lines. Here's a common way that people then screw this drawing up, right? By darkening different lines. Structurally, this is accurate. But if I then darken these lines, things look all sorts of weird. But if I darken these lines, now it looks like I'm looking up at that thing. Okay, so what lines you darken matters, basically. That is your 2-point above and your 2-point below. So far, you have a grand total of 10 objects that you have to draw. Any questions on how we did any of that? Okay. That is screenshotted for posterity. Now moving on to our last objects, the peak roof. You're going to have a bunch of these. You're going to have these things. You're going to have 5 of these things in 1 point, and you're going to have 6 of these things in 2 point. Do the 1 point ones first. Same process, not surprisingly. It's my horizon line. There are my vanishing points. In 1 point, you have 2 different variations, right, of these things. Both you're going to start the same way that you did with the pyramid. Drawing a rectilinear shape. On the ground plane. Front and back edges parallel to the horizon line. And in both instances, you're going to connect the corners to find the center of that rectilinear shape. Okay, so absolutely no difference so far. Difference between the two is that in this one, or in these ones, I want the triangle or the peaked roof right on the front of that thing. And this one's, I want it on the side of those things. For the ones on the side, easy. Take a horizontal line through that central pivot point, and that will tell you where the centers of the recessive sides are when they intersect. Drag a vertical line up to the same height on both sides, or from both central point. Connect them with a line that's also parallel to the horizon line. Connect those two peaks to their respective corners. Darken the lines that are visible, or that you want to be finish lines. For the same reason you didn't need to do pyramids on the horizon line, you don't need to do this peaked roof on the horizon line either, because it's the same thing as drawing one below. You do need to do one above the horizon line though. So I draw the base, front and back parallel to the horizon line. Recessive lines going to that central 1 point. Connect the corners to find your central pivot point. Horizontal line parallel to the horizon line straight through that central pivot point until it intersects the recessive lines to give you the midpoints of both sides. Vertical lines up to some sort of arbitrary height, but it is equal on both sides. Connect those peaks. Connect the corners to the peaks. Darken the lines that you want to act as finish lines. That's your 1 point in this position above and below. Any questions on how we did either of those? Okay. In this one then, once you've established where your central pivot point is, connect that pivot point, that central point, to your central vanishing point and extend it through the front and the back edge. That now gives you the center of both the front and the back edge. From one side or the other, doesn't matter which, take a vertical line up to an arbitrary height. That establishes the peak. Connect that peak to its associated corners on the front. Connect that peak back to your central vanishing point as well. Take another vertical line from the midpoint of the back edge until it intersects that peak. And then connect the peak to either corner on the back edge. Darken the lines. That you want visible. Exactly the same thing above and below. I'm going to draw this one further out to the side so that it's not irritating. Ugh. Vertical line straight up to an arbitrary height. Oops. Wait, my bad. Connecting your central point to the vanishing point, dragging it through the front and back edge. That establishes my midpoint. Darken the lines you want to read as finished lines. And to your great surprise and horror, the exact same thing above the horizon line. Same sort of word of warning, right? About objects looking weird. You're going to have to make this look quite a bit higher or taller in order to reveal the side of that object. Because if I make it just this height, this line and this line, right, all become the same line. Right, so to make that significantly different, I got to make that significantly taller. There's your 5 peaked roofs that you're responsible for. Brings you up to a grand total of 15 objects that you're drawing. Any questions on how I did any of those? Okay, give that a quick screenshot. Smash. Okay, gang, 6 more to go, all 2-point. And then we are done like proverbial dinner for the stuff that we've got to draw for the week. So, lastly, not leastly, your 6 2-point peaked roofs. Same start point. Vanishing points. Horizon line. You're going to have 3 coming off of this vanishing point, pointing in that direction, 3 coming off of this point, going in that direction. Here is a nice little trick that all of you can use. Make yourself a grid. And you can do this with 1 point, you can do this with 2 point, you can do them with both. Making yourself a grid just cuts out the necessity of having to drag every single line back to its point of origin every single time you do one of these drawings. So for instance, if I want the base of a 2-point triangle to be here, I can just use the grid that I already have. And I connect the corners. Inside that, I can basically guess in between those 2 lines for the midpoint. Bring my vertical line up to an arbitrary point, the same way I have right as for my 1 points. Connect those to their respective corners. Vertical line up from the midpoint on the back to a line that's receding to the same vanishing point, and connect those points to their respective corners for a peaked roof that looks like that. Exact same thing from the other direction. Except now I'm using this vanishing point to establish the midpoint on the front here, midpoint on the back there. This peak gets connected to that same vanishing point until it intersects this vertical line. There's your peaked roof going in that direction. How are we doing so far? Good? Okay. Not surprisingly, exact same thing, a little bit above, a little bit below. These are important to do because the angle of declension, right, will change. Exactly the same thing in the opposite direction. Okay, and then lastly, doing the exact same thing above the horizon line. Same word of warning about things looking weird. So there'll be a little bit of trial and error that you'll have to kind of bludgeon your way through. In order to figure this out. Okay, and as I draw the last one, and as I mentioned before, this assignment and the next assignment, to a slightly lesser extent, are intentionally simple. Right, so that you can put the time in to figuring out any sort of gaps in the knowledge base that you might have at this stage, rather than a later stage in the course, which will be significantly more frustrating. If this is making little or no sense to you right now, almost guaranteed that within a couple of weeks, this will start to make a lot of sense, right, to you, right? So fear not, brothers in arms, we're all in the same pickle. I have been where you are now. You will be where I am someday. I don't know what accent that is. Don't even bother. Those are the last 6 objects that you will have to do to create the 21 objects that you need to create, that you need to draw for this assignment. Now, in terms of what that assignment looks like, how you're going to be graded, where resources are, all of that jazz. I am going to show you all of that as soon as we are done fielding any questions that you guys might have about those 6 things. Pointing at the laptop or the iPad that you can't see. How you guys feel about that? Good? Feeling strong? Feeling fresh? Excited about life? Sweet. Okay, this class is a little unusual, guys, right? The class, not this class is unusual, this class in particular of all the classes that I'm going to be teaching you guys, right, is unusual in the sense that I do way more talking today than I normally do. Most of the time I try to keep my voice to about an hour and a half worth of stuff, right, filled with examples and demos, right, as well as us talking about things, maybe getting some feedback, right, on some other stuff, right, with questions of you guys. Today is a little unusual. I got to introduce the course. I got to go through the nuts and bolts of this, and now I got to talk about the stuff, right, in terms of you guys getting graded and resources and all that jazz. That being said, what I now have to do will take about 20 minutes or so. You guys got an option. Do you guys want a quick reset? Say take 5 minutes, come back at 1/2 past, right, and then do the 20 minutes, or do you want to just bludgeon through it? Because after this, it's all lab time. It's basically Q&A with a little bit of break for supper or something. Yeah, so Marie, how does this work for you guys? Because I mean, the way that this is set up right on the schedule, it says that you guys have it's a lab for 2 hours, right? And then there's a break for lunch, right? And then there's a 3-hour whatever class section. This has always confused me, this organizational principle, right? This the way that I like to do things, right, is to do the lecture first, get it out of the way, and then the rest of the time is all lab time, right, where you guys can Q&A to your heart's desire. So if we want to stick to the formal schedule, then we can break now, right, and just come back in an hour and I'll go over how you guys are going to be graded and stuff. Or we can go over how you guys are going to be graded and stuff, where resources are, and then we can take an hour from whenever that point is, and then you guys will just have the rest of the time to Q&A me, right, working on your assignments, right, etc. What do you guys want to do? Break now is option A, right? Break B, or break in 20 minutes or so is option B. Just put in the chat, A's and B's. Let's exercise our democratic privileges while they still exist. 2 for B so far. Us to a strong start. Let's see what the red states do. Oh my God, here we go. 1 for A. Break later. B, 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 B. 4 B's, 1 A. This is the time where I really wish that I spoke like an auctioneer. Okay, break later it is. We're breaking later seems to be the runaway favorite. Sorry, whoever the lone voter for the A. You've just exposed problems with democracy that everybody recognizes and nobody wants to talk about. But nevertheless, here we go. Okay. First things first. Let's look at your assignment. Okay. I will show you where all of this stuff is. Everyone, I am starting as of now a new screen share. Please go to said screen share. Should be up. Let me know when you're good. Good, good. Okay. This is all the shit that we went over today, as well as stuff that we're going to go over in a subsequent class. So sometimes there will be handouts that will relate to other classes, right? Because it makes more sense for me to include it in this handout. And then I will tell you what handout you'll have to refer back to when we get to that point. Right, here's the phenomenon of perspective, blah, blah, blah. Here's that base that we set up, how it relates to the human face, right? The difference between 1 point and 2 point, 1 point grid, step by step of how to draw a 1 point rectilinear object. I highly recommend that you use this, as well as the resource of the recorded version of my face, telling you the exact same thing. This will help you make sense of it if it stops making sense when you start doing it. If it still doesn't make sense, draw all of these using the same process. It'll take 5 to 10 minutes of your time, make your life a lot easier moving forward. Same thing with a 2 point grid, 2 point step by step, 2 point other grids, etc., etc. These are what we have referred to as the other oblique objects. We'll be going over these in another class. Don't worry about them for right now. You will be referring back to it. You can safely skip over this right at this point. The blending of all of those different objects in space, blending of 1 points and 2 points in space, the difference between distorted areas, right, and undistorted areas, which we've kind of gone over. All the geometric objects that we're going to be using, some ellipses stuff that we're going to be going over next class. Don't worry about that right now. Written version of your assignment. What is a warm-up sheet? Don't worry about it right now, right? I'm going to tell you. Right? There are not 22 objects in total. There are 21 objects, right, in total. I will be updating the handout, right, accordingly in short order. Hey, what does your warm-up sheet look like? Right? In your handout, you're going to have this there. Right? Your job is to fill these things in. Right? I'm going to show you how to fill those things in. Right? Consider this as kind of analogous to, say, warming up before you play a sport, warming up before you play an instrument. You don't just step out onto the ice, right, and start sprinting and fucking ripping pucks at people. Right? Generally, you're stretch, you do whatever it is you do. Pick the sport of your choice. Okay, same thing for drawing. This is what people who do this shit for a living do before they physically start drawing, painting, right? They're animating, etc. This is a good opportunity to develop muscle memory that will become useful for you, especially if you are really interested in becoming the more mechanically adept, right, at this subject. I'll go over what that means as well. This is what a finished warm-up sheet looks like, right? Or some version thereof. You can make your own, you can print this off and fill it in. Doesn't make any difference to me. This is, did you do it? Did you not do it? What does doing it look like in an acceptable version? I will show you. Your job is to fit all 21 of those objects into a single perspective field. Right? I do not want 21 different pages. I don't want 3 different pages. I want one page, right, with 21 different perspective objects of the kind that we've just gone over, smashed into that space. For very good reason. One, right, it shows you, right, repetitively that all of these objects exist quite comfortably inside the same space. That's important to get used to. Second, part of the job is to try to figure out how are you going to fit all of those objects inside that space. I don't care if they're different sizes. I don't care if they overlap each other. Doesn't matter to me. Right? What I do care about is that you've gone through the spatial exercise of trying to figure out how to smash all those things together inside the same space. Right? So an easy exercise, right, but a necessary exercise. Okay, so all I want is 2 pages. 2 pages, and then you're going to combine those things into a single PDF. This is a digital version versus a traditional version. I highly recommend that if you have the capacity to do this, that you do this assignment and all other assignments digitally. It'll make your life a lot easier, but you can do it traditionally. Doesn't matter to me. If you're doing it traditionally, please only use HB pencil. Right? HB pencil for your light lines forces you to keep your pencil line light, and then darker lines, right, increases your touch on the pencil, forces you to make dark lines, obviously. You can use a ruler for your structure lines. Right? I recommend that you don't use a ruler, but you can use a ruler for your structure lines. For your finished lines, you cannot use, right, a ruler. Part of this drawing or part of this class is still developing the mechanical ability in order to draw. This at least forces you to do a little bit of it. Okay, I will go over that. Okay, so dark lines, right, finish lines, no ruler, structure lines, light lines, you can use a ruler. If you're doing this digitally, you can use guidelines, right, for your structure lines. You cannot use snap tools or guidelines for your finish lines. Okay, and it is easy for me to tell what is a ruled line, what is a snapped line, as opposed to what's a hand-drawn line. This ain't my first proverbial rodeo, so to speak. Both of these things I want you to combine into a single PDF. You are going to name that PDF yourname.pdf. Okay? If you don't know how to make a PDF, ask one of your more tech-savvy classmates, right, or Marie. They will be able to walk you through this process way more easily than I will. Right? I only want one PDF though, and 2 parts to that PDF. Warm-up page, perspective object page. That's it. Please do not make your name any other name other than the name that is in the class list. I don't want your nickname. I don't know what it is. I don't know the name that you wish the people called you. right? Just your name, so I don't have to play some sort of like mix and match, right? When I'm marking your stuff. Please keep it under 5 meg so that it doesn't take forever for it to open for me on this end of things. If it's not a PDF, I'm not going to open it, right? And you will remain with a 0, right, until you change the file. If you have more pages, you will lose marks, right? How you'll lose marks, I'll go over in a second. This is how you're going to be marked. At the back of every handout, you're going to have a marking sheet. You'll have 10% for presentation. All you need to do to get that 10% is name your thing correctly, make sure that it's underneath 5 meg, have it saved as a PDF with the correct amount of pages. That's it. Just makes my life easier. Right? Your job in terms of submitting your assignments is to make my job as easy as possible. Put it this way, I have about 200 of your faces that I'm marking every term. No teacher that you have ever encountered in your entire educational history likes marking. Nobody likes marking. Your job is to make my job marking easier so I don't hate you when I'm dispensing your mark. Okay, so please make it as easy as possible. Your objective is always going to be out of 30, right? I do not mark in anything other than 5 mark increments. So you're never going to get 27.5 out of 30. You're going to get 25 out of 30 or 20 out of 30. For this assignment, your warm-up sheet is 5 out of 30. Did you do it? Did you not do it? Everything else is, do you know how to draw the objects that we went over today? Okay? And do they make sense? Basically, if there's like one mistake out of and everything else is perfect, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and won't deduct marks. But if there's multiple mistakes of the same kind or multiple kind, that's where you start to lose 5 mark increments. For right now, creativity and effort and line quality, if you get full marks on objective, you'll get full marks on creativity and effort and line quality. Except for this, right? And underline this, again, circle in red, etc. No shading. Please do not shade. Don't fill anything in with value at all. Do not use color by extension. Cross-hatching is shading. Pointillism is shading, right? Making something darker or lighter is shading. Do not shade. A, because we're going to be using value at a certain point, right? But in a very particular way. B, it's a waste of your time. It's a waste of your time, and it makes it more difficult for me to actually see the perspective that you're trying to draw, right? Most people use most people use shading to make bad drawings look good, right? That's not what we're doing here. I just want line drawings so that I can see that you understand what it is that we're going over. If you shade, and by shading, I mean anything that just fell into the categories that I described as shading, you get 0 for line quality, and you will remain with a 0 until the shading is gone. It is a pain in the ass for both you and me, but way more for you because you're the one who has to do it. Okay, so just don't shade. Thank you forever and ever. Amen. There will be a version of this handout right in your resources. I will show you where those resources are in very short order. Okay, I'm going to stop that share because it's no longer useful. Where do you find your resources? I'm starting another share. Please go to new share. It should be your Teams platform. This is your first assignment. So if we go to you guys, this is you guys here. You've already figured out the post thing. You will have your posts right here every week. I will send you a new invitation every week with sometimes video clips, sometimes not. For the first couple of assignments, there won't be any video clips because there's not really any point, right, to sending you stuff. Right, for your resources, you'll go here and you go to class materials, right? So under files will be class materials. In class materials, right, you have class recordings, handouts. Class recordings, right, is literally a recording of my face saying this stuff right from today. That'll be uploaded at the break every day. Handouts will probably, this one's probably already there, right? If it's not there, then it'll be there by the break. Right? Also, you will have screenshots, right? At the break, I will upload all of the screenshots from today's class right into that, right? It will be conveniently labeled lesson 01, screenshots underneath that. Okay, so that's where all your stuff is. This is a preview. The student outline, right, is a preview of all the stuff that we're going over. Right. Assignments. When you go over to assignments, this is where your stuff shows up. Okay. I want your assignment to show up here. This is the only place I will be looking for your assignment. It has to be uploaded before the next class. You will always have a full week to do your assignment, even if the class times don't match out, because you guys have classes on Mondays, there's going to be classes where you're not going to have a full week in between classes. Even if you don't have a full week between classes, you'll have a full week for your assignment. Your assignment can be uploaded 5 minutes after this class ends, and 1 minute before the next class starts, but it has to be there before the class starts. Right? If not, it's going to show that it's been handed in X number of minutes or days late. Right? You'll get a 0 on your assignment if it's late. Right? Without excuses that are acceptable, I will go over what those things are. Okay, so this is where it has to be. Don't put it anywhere else, because I'm not even going to look for it anywhere else. Just because, again, this just makes my life easier. Okay, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to stop this. Am I going to stop this? No, I'm not. I'm going to continue this. No, I think that's all I need for this. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to stop this share. Easiest way to get in touch with me is through the chat, in your team. You can send me an email. I submit, I check the email way less than I check the chat. So I will get back to you almost immediately if you put it in the chat. If I don't get back to you immediately, if you send me an email through Outlook, it's because I check that less regularly. This is fair warning. Now, I teach here. I only teach with Bow Valley on Mondays. That being said, I teach Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, at different institutions. So basically what that means is that I'm always in front of my computer Tuesday or Monday through Thursday, kind of checking in on who needs what. So if you want to get in touch with me, that's the block of time, is Monday through Thursday. If you get in touch with me Friday through Sunday, do not expect me to get back in touch with you, because I probably won't. Because I got a very busy studio practice outside of teaching, and I'm spending my time doing those things. You'd be shocked and amazed at how many people send me an email or a chat at midnight on Sunday evening and expect me to get back to them in a timely manner. That should be common sense that won't happen. If I don't get back to you in a timely manner, it's because you've gotten back to me outside of quote unquote office hours, so to speak. You've sent me an email rather than a chat and I haven't looked at it, or because I think with a little bit of thought you could have figured it out yourself, and I don't need to get back to you. Okay, so if you need to get back to me, send me a chat. Generally speaking, I'm looking at it pretty regularly during those days. Now, before I go over what you can expect out of me, in terms what acceptable excuses and stuff are, I'm going to go over what I expect out of you guys and what you can expect out of me. I have been teaching this subject for 23 years, something like that, I have an animation background, a film background, as well as now a fine art background, which I spend most of my time as an exhibiting artist, operating within. I've written a 500-page textbook on this subject, along with composition as it applies to image theory across different genres. I've taught in multiple film schools. This is just a way of me tweeting my own horn, and giving you a reason why you might want to pay attention to the shit that comes out of my face. I think that I give good bang for your educational buck. I think that I do it, and again, in a relatively straightforward, educational, intelligible, and again, God forbid, entertaining type of way. And I guarantee that I will be here on a week-to-week basis, to give you the benefit of whatever shamanic wisdom I have accrued over those 22, 23 years. Your job is to show up. Your job is to show up, engage, ask questions, get feedback, pretend like you give a shit, about the things that you paid good time and money in order to accrue, and maybe even justify my existence in the universe at the end of this experience. Now, this subject may be more or less important, right, to some of you, depending on what it is that you're going to be going into. This class is structured so that you can do well, right, with a minimal amount of effort. What do I mean by minimal amount of effort? You will have probably about 2 to 3 hours of every class that you can start doing your assignment in. Ask me questions, see if you're doing it right, get feedback. It is your responsibility to do those things. I do not think that as consenting adults that it is my responsibility to hold your hand through this experience, right, and make sure that you're doing your work. I'm not going to tell you to put your phone away. I'm not going to tell you to be quiet, although in this platform it's not really necessary. It is your job to basically take advantage of the resources, including myself and Marie, that are available to you in order to get better, right, at what it is you're paying good time and money to get better at. Okay? If you ask questions, if you abuse this resources, I will be more than happy, right, to answer any questions until we are both blue in the face, right, about that. If you don't ask questions, I presume that you don't want to ask questions, right, and I'm not going to force the issue, right, on you. That being said, if some of you are struggling, right, with your marks, I will make it very clear, right, in class time that you are struggling with your marks and you should be asking questions. And then I will leave it up to you. By next class, you'll see what feedback looks like. I will literally be taking screenshots of your drawings, drawing on top of them, showing where you need to improve, how you need to improve them, right? And, right, we'll keep telling you, right, until those things are improved. Okay, now, if you choose not to do your assignment, no, you cannot hand your assignment in late, right, outside of 3 excuses. If you choose not to show up to class, no, I will not go over the information with you because I've already done my part, right, of the contract that we are now tacitly engaged in. It is your job, right, to watch the recording at the very least, right, in terms of that particular class. It is the same thing that everybody else is getting. If you can't at least do that, right, then don't bother asking me questions. Now, if you don't have time to do your assignment, right, because you've got demands, right, which you will have, right, for other classes, that's fine. If you don't have time, right, to do a good job, right, on your assignment, that's fine. Hand something in. If you hand something in, you can redo that assignment once. You can redo every assignment in this course once. You can even keep showing it to me before you hand it in to see if it's done right. I'll even tell you what grade you're going to get before you hand it in to see if you still want to hand it in. This is how low the bar is here, guys. If you hand in a blank page with a file name on it that's acceptable, I'll give you 10% just for handing in a blank page. You can write "I'm sorry" on it. I don't give a shit. Hand something in. If you hand something in, you can redo that thing. If you don't hand anything in, what I presume you're saying is like, fuck it, I don't want to do it. And I think it's totally fine on my side to say, fuck it, I don't want to mark it. Okay, so if you don't hand something in, no, you cannot redo it. And I will be a dick about it. If for no other reason that this is a user-friendly way to get used to meeting deadlines and holding yourself accountable in a very competitive industry, which I'm sure that you guys you already know, and you don't need the fire and brimstone speech about it. But you will be eaten by wolves if you don't meet deadlines, right, in the industries that you're going into. Okay, so this is an easy way to get used to that. And again, I will be a dick about it. I don't want to be fire and brimstone. This is as close as I hope I ever get to it, but I totally will be. Right? And I will not feel bad about it at all because we've had this conversation. Sort of. I'm having a conversation with myself. But years are tacitly involved in it on the other side because, you know, you engaged in a totalitarian regime for the next 14 weeks. Three acceptable excuses, right, for missing class, not handing something in on time. You have to tell me before class, regardless of what the excuse is. First one, life stuff. Landlord's being a dick. You got to go to the bank. Visa's fucking expiring, right? Something like that. Washing machine exploded. Transit's fucked up. Whatever. Tell me, I'll believe you. If I don't believe you, I'll tell you to be a better liar and we'll just get on with our day. I don't need a note from your mom. You just have to tell me before class. Second excuse, you're sick. Hungover doesn't count. If you're hungover, just drag yourself through a miserable experience like the rest of the adult world. Sleepy doesn't count. Everybody's tired. Nobody gives a shit. If your tummy hurts, I don't care. Just deal with it. If you're a walking bag of COVID, stay at home, tune in online. Right? If you can't remain conscious for class, that's fine. The recorded version is going to be there. I don't need a doctor's note. Just tell me. Third acceptable excuse, something died. And by something died, I don't mean just anything died and you disagree with the concept of death and you're experiencing a world sorrow. I mean something you care about died. Pets, family, friends, in that order. Maybe. Maybe family, maybe friends in front of family, but pets for sure first. Okay. If something died that you care about, fine, just tell me. Outside of those three excuses, don't even bother telling me because the answer is going to be no. And again, I'll be a dick about it. So those are the playing rules. Hopefully this is the last time that I have to take on this tone of voice because I fucking hate doing it. Right. But it is useful, right, as a pedagogical tool to strike the fear of God into people, right, at the beginning of things rather than waiting for some, random time that may or may not show up later on. It looks like the how do you create a PDF, right, has been explored already. But for those of you who are doing things traditionally, take a photograph, scan it, do whatever it is you need to do, but make sure that whatever it is that you do is legible. And then take that thing into a digital format, copy and paste it, Pages, Word, Photoshop, Illustrator, doesn't matter to me. Make a single PDF out of that thing, keep it under 5 meg, right, and then submit it that way. For those of you who are doing it digitally, it's way easier. And again, I've already expressed my bias towards digital platform, right, rather than the traditional platform for this particular scenario. Anything else? Anything else? Anything else? Anything else? I think that's it. Oh, yeah, there's an attendance grade. One of you had the question for attendance. I mean, yeah, there's an attendance grade, but you've noticed I don't take attendance. Maybe Marie does, right? But again, same thing. I don't think that it's my job to hold your hand and make you show up for something that you've paid money for. Show up, don't show up, right? Fine. But if you don't show up, especially if you don't have a background in this subject, do not expect to do well. Right? The way that this course is structured is that I think the technical word is scaffolding, right? Is that each class stands on its own, but every class is scaffolded on the one previous. So if you come in 5 classes from now and expect to just all of a sudden be able to do it, good luck, right? It ain't going to work. Okay, so the recorded versions of the assignment are going to be there. No, you're good. The recorded versions of the classes and assignments are going to be there. Please take advantage of them. You can just scrub through to the parts that you've missed. You can literally watch me do the assignment for every class, right? Once we're done it, right? There should be no questions as to how to do these things. Anyway, those are the ground rules. I think if I've missed anything, right, we're going to have like another 6 hours of class time here yet tonight, right? And for me to like figure it out and answer questions. Yeah, I think that's it. Do you guys have any questions for me? Does it count if we show up online, or is it a campus thing? You know what? I don't really know, to be quite honest with you. For me, it makes sense for you guys to just take it wherever's most comfortable and most effective, right, for you. I think that some people lack the resources, right, in order to stay at home, right, and be online, right, and I don't really know what the school's protocol is for people showing up and being in class in person. If it was up to me, I'd say fill your boots, right? If you can show up to class sitting on a beach someplace, right, and get good educational value out of it, I'd suggest doing that. But if you need to be in class because you need to focus on shit, then be in class. If you have to be in class, that's a totally other thing. That might be something that Marie is better suited to answer, right? But as long as you're here, then that's fine by me. Can you use MS Paint? Sure. No, I mean, I do everything in Photoshop, so Photoshop is fine. I know Procreate works just fine as well. I'm not familiar with Illustrator enough in order to say whether or not it's fine. Whatchamacallit, there's another one that I've used and I can never remember the name of it. Whatever works. right? And that you're familiar with is entirely fine as long as it shows up looking like the assignment is supposed to show up. Okay? So Photoshop is entirely fine, right? If MS Paint works for you, then great. But again, just use a pencil tool. I don't want watercolor or crayon or whatever. Any other questions? No? How we think? How we feeling? Everybody good? Can we safely go put food in face? Yeah, like I said, right? You can use rulers if you're drawing traditionally for your light lines, right? You can use guidelines, right? If you are drawing digitally, you have to draw freehand digitally or traditionally for the finish lines. No exceptions. And again, if you don't think that I can tell the difference, by all means, poke that bear. Okay. That's it. Let's come back. What is it? 6 o'clock your guys' time? So back at 7 o'clock your guys' time. And then we'll go over what the lab section of this whole dog and pony show looks like. Okay. Okay. Any other questions we'll field after the break. See you guys in a bit. Enjoy your food. Bye.